And Jen, I'll kick it over to you. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Awesome. It is my pleasure. I'm thrilled to be here. Let me get my slides up here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I realize we'll probably have some more people joining in the next few minutes, so we'll just dive in and let people join us as they arrive. Welcome to Communicating Your Value and Qualifications. I'm really excited to talk through what it takes to stand out in your job search, even when you're navigating self-doubt, even when you're feeling really overwhelmed by the job search process and everything else you've got going on in your life and watching things like layoffs unfold. If we haven't met yet, my name is Jen Walker-Wall. I'm the founder of Work Wonders Careers, and for the last 9 years, I have been working with mission-driven professionals to help them navigate career transitions, big and small. And while we offer things like coaching and courses and workshops, I love to get into the nitty-gritty detail in the weeds with people, resumes, cover letters, LinkedIn profiles, really getting into the nuts and bolts of the job search process and helping people connect who they are and what they want with the assets that they really need to help them move forward. So I've been working with my team for almost a decade, and all of us have a background in HR, workforce development. My own experience was on the hiring end of things. So for many years, including years that were technically a recession, I worked on the hiring side, and I don't know if anyone here is in academia or has any sort of academic background, but my first taste of hiring came in an academic context. So if you don't know what a faculty job search looks like, it's like winning the lottery or becoming a rock star. There are thousands, there's hundreds, often over 1,000 applicants for every single role. And I saw exactly what it takes to, have that pile whittled down from, 800, 900, over 1,000 to, the handful of people that we would bring to campus and interview, and ultimately how that offer would be extended to one of those people. So we spend a lot of time really thinking through how to help people connect effectively, how to connect authentically. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to share, or I'll be able to share some of those tips with you today as we dive in. And this is intended to be more of a retreat than just, a lecture. So there will be a couple of opportunities for quiet reflection where I'll give some direction and we'll be able to debrief. So I love for these things to be as interactive as possible. I encourage questions and comments as we go, and we'll be happy to field as many questions today as I possibly can. Here I've tried to come up with some very simple goals. I actually have a very ambitious agenda that's very detailed and nuanced in my head, but ultimately I want to hold space. We have been planning this event for many, many weeks, and really what we were clear on is that we wanted to hold space to help people reflect on their strengths and ultimately identify their qualifications for potential target roles, and really get clear and try to cultivate clarity and confidence as part of their job search. I also want to offer sort of like a snapshot of our process and some of the exercises and prompts that we have clients do in order to create compelling job search content. Okay, so resumes, cover letters, LinkedIn, interviews, the whole 9 yards here. And ultimately, I want to be able to answer as many questions as possible. I did receive a list if you shared some questions ahead of time. I've tried to address some of those. I definitely didn't address all of them. So that's why I'm happy to, to take questions as we go here. But I would love to hear from you in the chat as we're getting started. So I want you to drop in the numbers that make the most sense for you. And I'm saying numbers plural. So, drop a 1 if you are not sure what kind of roles you want to be focusing on. Drop a 2 in the chat if you are emailing yourself jobs or scrolling through jobs, but not really applying for many or maybe any. Drop a 3 in the chat if you are applying to a large volume of jobs. So I would say, anywhere from more than 5 or 6 jobs a week. and drop a 4 if you are not getting any interviews, but you've been applying for jobs, and drop a 5 if you are stuck in the interview stage. And if I missed some part, some threshold or milestone in this process, let me know. Drop it in the chat and we'll see what's happening here. Okay, so let me take a peek. We've got, this is a good opportunity for me to take a sip of water. We've got 1, 1 and 2, 2 and 1, 1 and 2, 1 and 4, 3 and 4, 2 and 5, 3 and 4, 2 and 5. Okay, so we've got some people stuck at the end of, oh, hey, Sarah. I know Sarah. So, hey, Selena. Okay, 1 and 5, getting stuck at the interview stage. Okay. Just, way ahead of yourself. Good for you, Claudia. And then 3, Andrea, 3 and 5. Okay, so as you can see, we have a pretty good spread. And this is pretty typical. There's a couple things that are pretty typical here. The first being that people have multiple challenges. There's multiple obstacles and roadblocks that they're running into here. Fear not, pretty typical. And the other thing is that the group is, there's a spread to it. So I want to try and address as many aspects of the job search process as I can today. But before I go into any details, I just want to show you sort of like a high level view of the framework that we use with our clients. We always start with self-reflection, which is where we'll spend a good amount of time today. And this is because this is the critical preparation that's required in order to ultimately present really compelling career information, resumes, cover letters, LinkedIn interviews. This is the critical step most people skip. They just jump right into trying to tweak and edit and fix and update their resume without having a more comprehensive strategy or more the self-insight they need to really do so effectively. Imperfect action is where we focus on consistency in application. So a lot of times when our clients aren't getting traction, it's because they're not meeting sort of the threshold that's required to get traction quickly, which can be okay if you're a very passive job seeker. But if you're an active job seeker, like really hopeful for a job, you really want to be paying attention to your own outputs, right? And what you're putting into the process. Then, of course, we talk about self-care. We talk about taking care of your responsibilities, living your life while you job search, because it's very easy for it to be the only thing you're focusing on, especially if you're between jobs. Right now, it can be sort of like the sole focus, but I actually just don't think that it's effective to turn your job search into a 24/7 strategy. And then, of course, we have a component of our strategy that's around connection and relationships and building, establishing, and nurturing those. And then we come all the way back around to the self-reflection. But once we have some experience and some data, I think of that as like an assessment, right? Like we're doing self-reflection in a different way. We're sort of assessing the progress that we have so far. So where we're going to be spending the most time today is in the self-reflection and revision stage. I really want to help you think through what is going to elevate your online applications. Most of our clients get their interviews by applying cold online. Not to say at all that you shouldn't leverage or have relationships professionally. Those can absolutely open doors. But we pride ourselves on helping people create resumes and LinkedIn profiles that also work for them, that aren't useless, right? A lot of times people say to me, applying online is useless. Nobody gets a job that way. Like actually most people get jobs that way. And sometimes if you don't have the right approach or the right focus, you really wouldn't know that. So we're going to spend most of our time here today. We're going to start with self-reflection. So I'm going to just share a little bit about what this looks like for our clients, and then I actually have some prompts. So I will pause our conversation and let you pay attention to those when we get to that part, and then we'll debrief. So let's dive in here. One thing I want you to know is that a successful job search is really about successful communication. Like I consider this an exercise in strategic communication. It's also about connection, like being able to build rapport and resonance with people quickly. And I think a lot of that has to do with what we choose to say about ourselves in this process. So this is something we take really seriously. It's something we see people skip a lot because, if you're urgently looking for a job, you might not want to do this work, but this is what really helps give our job search focus, direction. It helps us identify our strengths and transferable skills. So it's something we recommend doing methodically and critically, right? We don't want to skip this part. So obviously there's some self-reflection in terms of, responding to prompts. We see our clients do a lot of free writing or documentation, maybe reviewing evaluations they've had in their jobs. But this is like client generated sort of content in response to exercises and reflections or other assets that they have just in the career process. And then we also really like to have clients review. So this would be looking at active job postings. Even if you are a passive or you're very proactive and you're just trying to get a better sense of how to tackle the job search when it's time to job search, looking at potential job postings and really understanding not just the responsibilities, which is what you'll use, right, to assess if it's the right fit for you, but the qualifications, like understanding what's actually being asked of applicants to be able to demonstrate. It's kind of a nice inductive way to approach some of the self-reflection process. You may find roles or organizations you aren't familiar with. You may find some gaps in your experience that you want to try and address in your current role or with some additional training. So definitely looking at active postings, I find, is just so instructive in this process. And then what's really key here is that we're writing all of this down. I think writing is a very important pedagogical tool. It's a learning tool. And one of the things that we're trying to really learn here is who we are and what we want. Very difficult to communicate that strategically and effectively if we're feeling like very unclear about what that is. And now there's lots of points in this process where self-doubt can creep in and you might be second guessing yourself. But really what we want to be clear on is what our experience is, what our interests are, what we know we're bringing to the table, what we want out of our next job. And if your job search doesn't have these sort of parameters or boundaries, like you can find yourself looking at a lot of things that are ultimately not going to be in alignment. This part, the self-reflection phase, is also really important because this is where we tell the truth, okay? Like we don't tell the truth when we're interviewing with potential employers, right? Like we tell aspects of the truth, but we're not fully putting the truth on display. So if you are coming from a really toxic work environment, if you've not been treated well, if there are things that you don't feel good about or proud about, like I think we need to air that out. But the place to air that out is not while you're interviewing, right? We sort of want to, give it some air, for ourselves and really understand what we've been through and to name it with people we trust, whether that's a coach or a trusted friend or colleague. I think it's really important to tell the truth. Something I'm seeing right now is people who've been laid off feel nervous about communicating that. And so just because sometimes practicing that story or acknowledging that this was, beyond your control can be a really helpful tool so that it's easier to sort of navigate some of the conversations that come along with that later on in the process. All right, so I want to talk about some of these questions here, and then I want to give you a few minutes to consider addressing them. If you happen to have like a recent job posting, feel free to pull it out for this exercise. If not, just jot a couple of these questions down and you can revisit them at a different time. But I just want to share some of the questions that I think are, this is a minimum viable self-reflection process is what I like to think of this. So I always like to ask clients, what do you want more of? And what do you want less of, right? Like, what are you willing to or eager to give up about responsibilities or about the environment or, whatever that might look like for you. It doesn't have to be task oriented. It might have to do with the culture, might have to do with the commute. Like, what is it that you want to get rid of? This is usually the easier of the two questions to answer. And then what do you want more of, right? Do you want more, do you want a closer relationship with your manager? Are you looking for more professional, development opportunities? Are you looking for a clear trajectory? Are you looking to make more money? Like, really spell that out for yourself. And then the second question here is, what kind of environment do you need to thrive? So I really want you to think about the work experience that you've had and the elements that contributed to you feeling as best as you have, right? So I know for me, like this was about it was about compensation. Like all my experiences in the nonprofit world. So I know I did best when I felt like I was actually well compensated, which took a long time, where I was in an environment where they really valued experimentation and it was like a safe place to experiment. Like those things were really important to me, where people were well resourced and kind, like all of that made a difference. People are very quick to think about their own qualifications, which are important. But part of what the reflection process is about having expectations for the outcome of your job search, for a potential employer, for yourself. And people are often reluctant to actually do that. But I think that's how we land a job that's actually in alignment with our skills, interests, and values. And then I always ask, what are you most proud of? And I'm open to whether this is an actual outcome of a project you worked on, or if it's, something behind the scenes that isn't evident. Sometimes it's just about how people show up in difficult circumstances and continue to treat people well, or have high level of integrity in a workplace where that might not be the case. So I give yourself permission to answer this as honestly as you can. And if you do happen to have a target job posting hanging around, even if it's old, I'm curious, what are the qualifications that you're actually seeing? And how easy is it for you to see your own qualifications on the current iteration of your resume? Okay, see a couple comments here. Fatima says these are solid reflection questions. Thank you, especially number 2. Yes, I'm a big believer that if people were treated better, people would need fewer career transitions. I think a lot of transitions are initiated because of institutional and systemic issues at work. So I think it's important to acknowledge and name that. Danielle says, the environment is really hard for me to identify. Non-cubicle farm, plenty of sunlight and bright colors. Does that count? I think that counts. If it's a physical environment, that makes all the sense in the world. I work from home and it's a free-for-all around here with leaf blowers and lawn mowers. So sometimes I'm like, I should really go into an office where there's soundproofing. And we can be overstimulated at work, we can be understimulated at work. So I really do think it's helpful to think about this. Carolyn, that's a really great question. I'd love to come back to it when we, zoom out just a little bit. So what I'd like to do now is, it's 12:18. We've got some questions here. I'm going to set a timer for 7 minutes. And then we'll do a little check-in and debrief here so that I can hear where people have landed. I do want to hold space for you to do some of this self-reflection work because I know from being a coach and consultant that it's difficult for people to do this. So I'm setting the timer now, and I will start us again in 7 minutes. This point. Perfect. Just to wrap up on the reflection piece. Well, I shouldn't say wrap up because reflection is a place where we need to be constantly, right? Like the job search, I use that sort of secular way to convey our process because it's a non-linear process. But the goal here is to have clearer and clearer expectations and priorities for our job search. It's to identify target roles and their qualifications. Without this, very hard to do what we're about to do. Okay, so you can have multiple target roles. I'm fine with that as long as they make sense for you. But in order to create compelling career assets, we need to make sure that our target is clear. That's how we're strategic and effective in this place. There's also an opportunity here to cultivate relevant stories and examples that will rehash and revise in the next stage. And also just to give us space for our own learning, disappointments, and fears, right? Which I think you can see reflected in just the couple of folks who shared here. A lot of concerns about whether what we have is enough, a lot of assumptions that we might need to revisit. That's really important work. That's helping us get on a more aligned path to communicating our qualifications effectively. And what's really great is that when we are doing this work and we take it seriously and we spend some time here and we write everything down, we have a lot of draft content, right? And I love that because it can easily be revised and repurposed for what we're about to do. So in this next phase, I'm going to talk a lot about resumes, but I've also got some notes here on interviewing. So if you want to interject with questions about how this applies more to interviews, please feel free. Or we can debrief about that at the end. But I want to get into like, okay, so we have a better sense of how to identify the qualifications of the job. We know we've documented, who we are, what our strengths are, what our achievements are. Now what, right? So we're moving into this process. And some things I want people to think about when there's a particular role at hand. Okay, so we've got a role and that's the direction we're going. Is what is my most relevant experience for the role? Okay, so not the breadth of the experience is what's helpful, but typically there's particulars. Sorry, can you guys hear all those sirens in the background? Sorry about that. Do I have any connections that might be helpful? So this is something you should and can leverage if you have it. If you don't have the right introductions and people for the job that's available, no problem, but it's worth assessing. And it might be really helpful to do another mini reflection. So some free writing and brainstorming around what it is that you specifically want to highlight and acknowledge. Earlier this morning, I was working with a resume client, and she wanted to I was writing what I'm about to show you how to write. And, she wanted to share something very, very broad about her experience. And I really encouraged her to take it in a more specific direction so that it really aligned with what people were actually asking for. So I want you to think a lot about like the resume is about us, but it's not for us. Okay. It's a piece of marketing material for you. And of course, we want to be thinking about what those qualifications are. So here's just a few years ago, I've been using this for a while now, I grabbed some qualifications off a marketing manager role. And I just want to show you a couple of things here, like how I sort of break this down in my mind. So you can see in black down here, this isn't a very technical role, but this is what I would consider technical skills, right? Like Adobe, Creative, Microsoft, email marketing, social media, right? These sorts of things. There's also some basic requirements, some areas of competency around experience in marketing and communications, building out these materials, social media marketing. And then in the pink color, we sort of see these are some personal attributes, right? Energetic, flexible, attention to detail. So I try to think about all of these. And in my mind, when I'm thinking about addressing them, I do sort of collapse them thematically around technical skills and personal attributes and areas of competency, because this is a very long list of things. Like we're not going to have a list of things that look exactly like this on the resume, but let me show you what we do and encourage our clients to do. That's very, very helpful, which is writing a summary of qualifications that is tailored for each role. So you can see here, we've got the years of experience and some of the domains of expertise that were required. We've addressed the technical aspects of the job here. For more technical people, like if you're a software engineer, I actually just list that languages, frameworks, underneath the summary of qualifications. Some other folks like accountants or project managers will sometimes just have a skills section that will include the applications, platforms, and software. So there's a few different ways to do this, but this is a fairly junior role. So it made sense to just kind of weave it into the summary of qualifications. And then you can see we've got a bullet point here about, who this person is, sort of like interrelational soft social skills. And so we're trying to check as many boxes as we can in 3 to 5 bullet points that are short and concise and easy to read. That's really critical here. You've probably heard of tailoring your resume for each application. I think for a lot of people, that is the correct way to go, because what this allows us to do is to do that just at the top. Like a lot of our clients will just tailor the summary of qualifications and not necessarily need to change anything else about their resume. Now, if there are folks who are considering like a couple of different pathways, they may have a couple different resume templates. So that may be the case for you if you have job search goals and are including target roles that, have different qualifications. You might benefit from a couple different resume templates emphasizing different aspects of your experience. But what's really important to know about this is that it's concise, it's easy to read, it's right at the top of your resume underneath your contact information and any other information that we might share. And the reason for that is we want to put those qualifications front and center. And we also want them to be easy to read. So if they just turn into like a block of text, that's not always the case. Oh, and I should say, so you can see I've got some text in bold here. You don't need to have your text in bold. This is just to signal sort of language that can be easily reused. And the text, the unbolded text, is language pulled directly from the qualifications themselves. Danielle is asking, are qualifications important to highlight in the cover letter or and resume as well? Yes. So what I typically encourage is that the cover letter can address, one or two of these things in a little bit more detail. So an example of a recent graphic design project that required collaboration and project management, right? So I like to think of the cover letter as like a show, don't tell situation. And you can also include a paragraph, about your values and how they show up at work too. That's often helpful and relevant as well. These prompts might be good stand-ins as well, so feel free to screenshot this. But this is another good way to sort of tee up your qualifications using a little of your language and a little bit of their language. So just to recap on the summary of qualification strategy, I think this makes you appear as qualified as possible, as quickly as possible. And that is really the goal with your resume, right? We keeps everything concise and easy to read quickly. There's an opportunity to adopt and mirror language in the job posting. So with that client that I mentioned this morning, if you sent your partner or roommate to the store to grab milk, you wouldn't want them to come home with Coke. Both of them are beverages, right? Both of them are liquids. Both have their place. But when an employer is naming something specifically, and we can address that honestly and specifically, that's generally the approach we want to take. So it's not about copying and pasting their qualifications into your summary so much as it's about being very clear that you have the qualification that they're asking for. If you don't have the exact qualification that they're asking for, then zooming out a little bit might make sense. So instead of saying you have familiarity with Salesforce, you could say you have familiarity with a wide variety of CRMs and learn new technology quickly or something like that. That could be helpful as well. This can be easily modified for other roles, right? You can remove the job specific language and replace it with other job specific language. And I also just want to say, I really think there's more than one way to do this well. So I spend a lot of time thinking about writing these summaries, but what's most important to me is that, you understand there's more than one way to do this well. The other thing I want to share is that you can absolutely include achievements, results, and outcomes without metrics. And this is relevant for your resume as well as for the interview process. So let me just give you a couple of examples of how we do that. So this first statement, responsible for distributing reports and data, that was a real line in a client's resume. And after talking with them and better understanding what that actually looked like and what it meant for them to do that work, we revised it to say supported business decisions and strategy by distributing accurate and timely reports to executives. So you can see here, there's a result. These reports help inform what the business does. The executives do that, right? So adding a little bit of context and the result is business decisions are able to be made. Makes a big difference in how you perceive, this bullet point. And I will just say, we get caught in the weeds, lost in the weeds of our work. It's very easy to feel like your work doesn't matter. That's one of the things I hear from people really most often. So I really want you to think who benefits from this work? What does this work enable? And try to find a way to tell that story as best you can here. Helping clients align their resources, another line from a client resume. But as I like to dig around a little bit, we realized that what this really was about improving profitability by providing oversight and leadership in aligning those client resources. So you can see there's a bit of a difference here. Just some quick tips on communicating effectively throughout the hiring process. These qualifications really can inform the whole breadth of the process, but you will learn more as you go, right? So if you're anticipating a phone screen, you do want to think they're going to double check that I have this experience. but they might share something that you don't know. So what I really want people to be able to do is listen as much as you're talking and be able to tailor your stories in a way that makes sense as you learn more and more about the job. I also want you, this is kind of awkward, right? But you can write your story. Sorry, it says write your stories, but then share them out, speak them out loud. So you want to do writing, brainstorming, editing, and then talk them through. It can be very, very awkward, but I think, you can do it in the privacy of your own home, right? The other thing is that practicing going through the interview process can be really helpful. So when we have clients, what I often encourage if clients haven't job searched or interviewed in a while is to really make that the goal. Like just go through the interview process as much as you can, because that can help really sharpen your storytelling. Unfortunately, the best kind of practice is that like immersive experience here. I also really like the STAR formula for storytelling in interviews. So if you're not familiar, situation, task, action, and result, right? So you want to describe the situation a little bit. And this is usually a good opportunity to pick like a high level description of the situation and a little bit about the task or action that you took and what the results were. Right. So you can take a time you were managing a project and conflict arose, or a time you made a mistake. This is a good formula to kind of plug in, like, what was the situation? What did you do? What was the action you took? And then what was the result, right? So that's a good way to sort of consolidate. And some prompts that I like include most recently, I love the most recently, because if you've got, relevant experience that's a couple years old, you can kind of, or less relevant experience, like you can focus on what really matters and cut right to the chase here. The result of this was, sometimes if I catch myself rambling, I'm just like, pull it back. Like the result of this work was, my contribution was, and it resulted in, is also like a really helpful formula to just like plug in the action and share the results here. So hopefully these are helpful. Let me just see. Yes, you will be able to go back. Allison's asking, how do you decide which things to put on the cover letter? I always default to the qualifications. I'm never making willy-nilly decisions about what to put in the cover letter or any part of this. Like I'm always looking at what is in this job posting, not just what are they asking me to do, but what are they asking me to have and to demonstrate. And the degree to which I can use the resume, the cover letter, the interview, the LinkedIn to demonstrate those things, I think you're better off. How important are cover letters to employers? I think this really runs the gamut from not at all important to like very important. And the way I think about this in general, like the rule of thumb is, there are a lot of hiring managers who like these. People consider them writing samples. I don't know at this point in time if cover letters are really a hiring best practice, but that's not going to stop some people from really preferring them. And because we can't read people's minds, if it's a job you're really enthusiastic about, I think it makes sense to give yourself, the time to write a cover letter. So what I'd like to do is give folks a minute to think about revamping a bullet point on their experience section, or perhaps drafting, a few bullet points for a summary of qualifications. I'm just going to set my timer for 5 minutes so that we can sort of get through. So why don't you go ahead and get started, and I'll pull up my timer here. So think about something that you have written down on your resume that you could revise and really demonstrate impact for. I want to continue on with a few more tips here. So some do's and don'ts for confidence and resonance. And resonance is the word I like to use because too often people are focused on their performance. And what I'm interested in is, yes, helping you feel good about your performance, but I also really want you to think about your experience, especially in the hiring process. Okay. So pay attention to how well prepared the people are, how you're treated, how clear and thorough they are in communicating, what to expect. All of that can be something you want to take into account when you're making big decisions about your career. Don't forget to make your resume easy to read and to scan quickly. A lot of times, the longer the job search process can go on for people, the more content they tend to add on. So I really want you to focus on those qualifications, really understand what's being asked of you, and make sure that that is always front and center. I also really want to remind you that listening and learning as you go, there's always more to uncover about a job, right? And so there may be ways that you want to change the way you're approaching your storytelling, the aspects that you're interested. You may be less interested as you go and want to withdraw. So I really want you to pay attention to what you're hearing as you go. Do follow the directions on, for online applications and in general. This might sound obvious, but it's not. I'll just say that from being on the other side of the process. If they say upload a PDF, upload a PDF. If they say write a cover letter, I recommend writing a cover letter. I do think it's best, on your application process and your professional relationships are not mutually exclusive tactics. Like, they can be very complementary, when the timing is right. So looking for opportunities to maximize those two things together can be very fruitful. We're not getting a chance to like dive into this in today's call, but you will want to iterate and improve over time. There is no perfect resume or perfect application. And so we really try to help people focus on creating opportunities, creating good habits, being consistent, doing the things you need to do to generate results, and to iterate and improve over time. And at the end of the day, while I always have thoughts and love to think about best resume strategies, the best kind of resume is one that gets submitted. Even if it's incomplete, even if it hasn't been updated in a while, you are either going to choose to give yourself a chance or not. And if it's something that you're really compelled by, I really recommend giving yourself a chance when possible, right? Go all in on yourself. Let me just see the questions here. Regarding readability, is it better to limit things to 2 pages or better to have a more readable and spaced out resume that goes beyond 2 pages? 2 pages is totally fine. 1 page is definitely not a rule. A lot of people kind of still carry that belief, but that's not true. I would say longer than 2 pages probably depends what kind of line of work you're in, and how much work experience you have. Generally, people, I keep my resume to 2 pages. It can be a little bit longer, but 2 pages is pretty reasonable if you've got 10, 15 years of experience or so. If you need a little bit more room to include things like volunteer experience, or publications or whatever, speaking gigs, that can be okay too. So always as concise as possible, but I'd never compromise that readability. So you can play around and see what works best for you. I always like to share these photos because this is what comes up when you type in job search to stock photo sites. And I have been told time and time again, these are very realistic photos. I thought they were a little far-fetched and dramatic, but it turns out that's actually what it feels like. And so what I want to say is that just because you are in that space right now doesn't mean you will be there for even much longer. You can really change things. We say, when it rains, it pours. So you never know how close you could be to your next opportunity. I also just want to, and maybe I'll include the link to be sent out, to invite anyone who wants to relaunch and refresh their job search this summer to come and work with us. I'm taking people on for the summer for just another few weeks, and have some open spots, and would love to see folks. So we'll include that link if that's okay. Actually, let me see if I can drop our links in the chat here. You can learn more about our work. And thank you for having me. I'd love to spend the next few minutes answering people's questions, if there are any remaining questions. Maybe I should go back to the prompts here. Someone asked to see the prompts, right? I think these were what people were looking for. Once you see these here, you'll notice them. It's very standard HR talk. Like, you'll see it, you'll see them all over the place in job descriptions. So we're really just using some standardized language back at them. So that's where these really come from. Hey, Sarah, if your relevant experience is sandwiched around irrelevant experience, do you have suggestions for how to list that on your resume? I almost always use a chronological resume, or reverse chronological resume, I guess I should say. My question is your relevant experience visible on the first page? Can we make it visible on the first page? If we can do that without messing up. So sometimes that means consolidating less relevant experience if it's more recent. That can be a helpful thing to do. I don't love using a functional resume format. For a lot of reasons, but I would see if you can consolidate the bullet points that are less relevant and try to move that more relevant but historic experience forward a little bit. Rachel's asking, any tips or thoughts on managing imposter syndrome throughout the resume development process? This is a great question, and I ask clients to engage with me on literal realities. Clients add things to those qualifications all the time that are not there. People question, their ability to meet a basic qualification. I see this again a lot with technical and analytical skills, is what I have enough? I'm not a data scientist, I'm not a mathematician, but that's not what the roles are being hired for. So I like to go really granular and just be like, do we check this box? Do you have this experience? And then it also helps me to really also zoom out on imposter syndrome, okay, and look at it as a structural issue. This is something women and people of color face. It's not something everyone faces. Some people bring an abundance of confidence to the job search process. So it helps me both to check my own experience in a very granular, literal way, and also to remember that the reason I feel anxious or second guess myself is a structural experience. You are definitely not the only one. I don't have a resume to share, but I can tell you that it's a very basic, boring Word doc, Google Doc. I use Arial font most of the time. I use simple bullet points. The emphasis is on the content. That's how I like to write resumes. Templates are not super helpful or even necessary, especially if you're not a creative professional. A question about federal resumes that list your entire working history. There's a USA Jobs has a resume builder that will sort of transform your resume into the federal version. Talk about granular. So I would recommend using that. It is a doozy to have to list your entire working history and kind of do it in the federal way. But I think the resume builder that the USA Jobs website has is a good place to start. Erin, I recommend reverse chronological experience, right? So yeah. I think Joy might be asking about the ratio. Yes, 3 to 5 bullet points. It's usually, I kind of refer to it as the top third of the resume, if that helps with ratios. Sometimes it's a little bit less, sometimes it's a little bit more. If your resume is only 1 page and you don't have a summary at the top, this might make it 2 pages. It depends. I don't know how much work experience you have, but I wouldn't not use it. Sarah's been to so many of my workshops. She's going to start giving them soon. That would be great. All the workshops. You're welcome. Okay, so let me just put my contact. I'll drop my contact info again in the chat. I'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to find me on social. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok. Not always in that order, but that's the order I should be on. And I'd be happy to hear from anyone. Thank you for having me. Thanks for hosting me and for being such engaged participants.
Thank you so much, Jen. And I threw it in the chat already, but for those of you who joined us today, thank you so much for being here. I will be sending out a recording of a lot of the slides that Jen covered. As you might have noticed, I took some breaks during the reflection just so you all could have that time to debrief in a safe space, but recording will be sent out, and please be on the lookout for other offerings from SGO. We are looking to support you all who are job searching, job switching. So thank you all so much for being here, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, have a great rest of your day. Stay cool, everyone.